Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every connection when the energy shifts. When the person who once called every morning suddenly takes hours to respond. When their warmth turns into indifference. When he withdraws, and in that moment you face a choice. You can lean in, panic chase, ask, "What happened? Are you okay? Did I do something wrong?" Or, you can do something radically powerful. You can go silent, not out of anger, not out of ego, but from the calm, quiet strength that comes when you finally realize your value doesn't need to beg to be seen. Silence, my friends, is not a punishment. It's a boundary. When someone starts giving you less, your silence says, "I noticed, and I will not compete for basic respect." Now here's where it gets interesting, because when you go silent, truly silent emotionally, mentally, and physically, you invite truth into the space. And you'll see very quickly who he is when he doesn't have access to your energy. Some men will panic, not because they love you, but because they love your attention. Others will disappear completely because they were never truly invested to begin with. And then there's the rare few. Silence is often misunderstood. People assume that when you go quiet, you're playing games or trying to manipulate the other person into chasing you. But in truth, silence, when used with intention, is not about punishment. It's about preserving your energy, reclaiming your self-worth, and creating space for clarity. When someone you care about withdraws, especially in a romantic dynamic, your first impulse may be to fix, to understand, to reach out. That's because connection feels threatened and your heart wants to repair the bond. But what if instead of reacting with anxiety, you responded with stillness? When someone emotionally pulls away, it's easy to internalize it. You might start wondering, did I say too much? Was I too available? Did I push too hard? But none of those thoughts serve you. His withdrawal might not even be about you. It could be about his own fears, his unresolved trauma, his uncertainty about commitment, or simply his emotional immaturity. So why should you be the one scrambling to fill the gap he created? When you go silent, you're not trying to win a power game. You're holding a boundary that says, "I will not overextend myself to someone who cannot offer me emotional safety." Your silence becomes a form of self-care. It allows you to turn inward, to listen to yourself instead of the chaos outside. It gives you space to ask, how does this situation make me feel? Do I feel secure, loved, respected? Or do I feel anxious, invisible, and uncertain? Those questions matter more than chasing after answers from someone who doesn't know how to give them. And here's what happens next. When you choose silence, you interrupt the cycle of codependent behavior. You stop the emotional chase that so many people fall into, constantly trying to earn love, affection, or validation through effort. Silence flips the script. It puts the mirror in front of the other person. It forces them to feel your absence and to decide what they want to do with it. That absence speaks volumes. It says, "I am not going to beg you to stay. I am not going to convince you of my worth. I am going to let your actions define the relationship." A person who truly values you will notice the shift. They will feel the disconnection and want to restore the bond, not because you pressured them, but because they choose you. A person who was only there for convenience, for emotional ego boosts, or who was never emotionally ready, will drift further. And as painful as that is, it's clarity. And clarity is a gift. Your silence isn't cold, it's dignified. It's the act of saying, "I respect myself enough not to chase someone who isn't sure about me." You're not withholding communication to punish. You're choosing not to pour into someone who isn't showing up. That's not passive-aggressive, it's emotionally intelligent. In today's dating culture, where instant replies and emotional oversharing are common, choosing silence is radical. It forces the other person to self-reflect. It shifts the dynamic from reactive to intentional. Instead of getting caught in the game of push and pull, you step out of the game altogether. You become an observer of behavior, not a fixer of it. And in doing that, you reclaim your emotional power. Because the truth is, when someone withdraws, you don't need to chase them. You need to see them clearly. And often, that clarity only comes when you stop trying to speak and start watching what silence reveals. When a man pulls away, It often stirs a storm of insecurity and self-doubt in the woman experiencing that distance. It's natural to think, what did I do wrong? Did I say something to upset him? Why is he suddenly acting so different? But his withdrawal is rarely about your worth. It's not necessarily a reflection of how valuable or lovable you are. More often, his behavior reveals where he is emotionally, how ready he is for intimacy, how safe he feels being vulnerable, and how equipped he is to handle emotional closeness. Emotional withdrawal in men can happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's fear, the moment things start getting emotionally intense, when connection deepens and vulnerability is required. A man who hasn't learned how to sit with his own emotions might pull back. He may feel something real, and instead of leaning in, he panics internally. Vulnerability, to someone emotionally inexperienced, feels like a threat rather than a bridge to deeper love. And when that fear is stronger than his desire to connect, he creates distance. Not to hurt you, but to protect himself. Other times, the withdrawal isn't even conscious. Some men don't even realize they're doing it. They simply feel overwhelmed or uncertain and start investing their energy elsewhere. Work, friends, distractions. Because sitting in emotional discomfort isn't a skill they've developed. This is not something women can fix for them. It's an internal gap that only they can choose to close. This is why understanding that his withdrawal reveals more about him than you is powerful. When someone distances themselves, you are witnessing their emotional ceiling. You're getting a glimpse into what they are capable of handling emotionally. And instead of taking it personally, it becomes a moment of insight. You begin to see, this man may not be ready for the kind of love I'm offering. He may want the idea of closeness, but not the reality of it. That doesn't make him bad, it makes him human. But it also means you have to make choices that protect your emotional well-being, rather than try to convince someone to be what they are not yet ready to be. Many women make the mistake of trying to close that emotional gap for him. They chase, they try harder, they send one more message hoping it will bring him back. But what they don't realize is that every time they do this, they rob themselves of the opportunity to see who he really is. Because if someone can only stay close when you carry all the emotional weight, that's not partnership, it's imbalance. His ability to stay connected during emotional intensity is not your responsibility. It is a reflection of his internal world, his conditioning, and his level of self-awareness. And his reaction to emotional closeness will tell you everything you need to know about the kind of relationship he's capable of building. Is he someone who faces discomfort, who leans in when things get deep? Or is he someone who disappears the moment things feel real? When you stop interpreting his behavior as a reflection of your worth, you begin to make clearer decisions. You stop chasing and start observing. You realize that love is not about proving yourself to someone emotionally unavailable. It's about aligning with someone emotionally capable. And the sooner a man shows you his emotional limits, the more empowered you become in deciding whether those limits align with the kind of love and stability you want. This mindset shift is subtle but life-changing. You stop asking, what did I do wrong? And start asking, is he emotionally ready for what I need? And from that question, you begin to honor yourself. You stop molding yourself to fit someone else's emotional gaps. You start respecting what your heart deserves: consistency, presence, and someone who doesn't run when emotions get real. Understanding that his withdrawal says more about him than it does about you helps you detach from the pain of rejection. It helps you stop chasing clarity from someone who is confused, because clarity doesn't come from asking why someone pulled away. It comes from observing that they did, and realizing that their action is your answer. The way you react when someone withdraws from you is one of the most powerful moments in any relationship. It's not just about what you feel, it's about what you teach through your response. Every time you respond to someone's inconsistency with anxious chasing, over-explaining, or trying harder to win them back, you're reinforcing a dynamic where they learn they can pull away and still have full access to you. Your reaction becomes part of the lesson they're receiving from the relationship. Even if you don't intend to teach it, People often think relationships are built on what we say, but in reality, they're built on the patterns we allow. Every time you tolerate mixed signals, silence, emotional unavailability, or cold behavior and keep giving warmth in return, you teach that person how far they can go without losing you. They may not be consciously manipulating you, but they're learning what behavior you will accept. So, if someone withdraws and you chase, they learn you'll always be there, no matter how inconsistently they show up. That becomes their new normal. But when you respond with silence, not from resentment, but from awareness, you send a very different message. You teach them that your presence is not guaranteed. That access to your energy is earned through respect, consistency, and emotional maturity. You shift the dynamic without saying a single word. It's not about being passive-aggressive or trying to make them miss you. It's about showing them, without drama or pleading, that you value yourself enough to stop giving to someone who isn't giving back. This is not easy, especially if you have a pattern of overgiving or if you tend to find your worth in being chosen. In those moments, it can feel almost unbearable not to send that message, not to ask what's wrong, not to keep the connection alive. But what you're doing when you resist the urge is retraining yourself and them on how you expect to be treated. You're building a new standard, one that says, I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to connect with someone who chooses me clearly. This doesn't mean you have to be cold or shut down emotionally. It means you respond from your worth instead of your wounds. You don't match their inconsistency, but you don't feed it either. You hold space for clarity, and in that space, they're forced to either grow into the level of emotional presence the connection requires, or they reveal that they were never capable of it in the first place. One of the most misunderstood ideas in love is that if you just love someone hard enough, they'll change. But the truth is, people rarely change from being comforted into complacency. They change from seeing the consequence of their behavior. When they realize that they're about to lose someone valuable because they didn't show up fully, your reaction to their withdrawal becomes the wake-up call. Not your words, not your emotional explanations, your decision to stop dancing with inconsistency. This is also about self-trust. You teach others how to treat you by the way you treat yourself in the moments they don't. If you abandon yourself to chase someone who's retreating, you reinforce the belief that your needs and boundaries come second to their comfort. But when you choose to stay grounded in your self-respect, you show them, and yourself, that love doesn't have to cost you your dignity. It's also worth noting that some people are drawn to the energy of being chased. It gives them a sense of control or validation. But the moment you stop reacting with pursuit and instead respond with peace, they either rise to meet you or fade away. Either outcome is valuable, because you don't want someone who only engages when you chase. You want someone who chooses you even when you're still, especially when you're still. So, every reaction you give is either an invitation to grow the relationship or a signal that you're willing to carry it alone. And if you're always the one reaching, fixing, or explaining, the other person never has to step up. They never have to reflect. But when you pause, when you go quiet, when you don't react in the usual way, they're faced with a decision. They'll either lean in or lean out. And that response will tell you everything you need to know about the future of the connection. When you go silent after someone pulls away, something powerful happens. You create space, and in that space, the truth has room to rise to the surface. Most people fill silence quickly, often out of fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. So they chase, they talk, they text, they try to keep the connection alive, even if it's only on life support. But when you don't rush in to fill that gap, when you allow the silence to sit, you invite clarity. You give both yourself and the other person a chance to face what's real. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It's a very specific kind of communication. It says, I am not going to force closeness when it's not being mutually maintained. That choice removes pressure. It allows the other person to feel what life is like without your consistent emotional presence. And that is often the exact wake-up call they need, not because you're manipulating them, but because you're withdrawing energy from a one-sided exchange. Most people aren't aware of what they're doing when they emotionally withdraw. They're not always trying to hurt you. Sometimes they're just operating out of their own protective habits, pulling away when things get deep, distancing themselves when they feel overwhelmed, avoiding the kind of connection that requires vulnerability. But when you immediately chase after that withdrawal, they don't have to face themselves. Your pursuit becomes their distraction. They focus on your reaction instead of their own behavior. That means they never get the chance to feel the emotional consequence of their inconsistency. Silence interrupts that cycle. It removes the noise. It shifts the energy from reactivity to awareness. Suddenly, they're not distracted by your emotional outreach. They're left alone with their own thoughts, their own discomfort, their own decisions. And that's when the truth begins to emerge. In that space, one of two things typically happens. The first is that the person realizes they missed the connection, they recognize the shift, and they begin to take genuine steps toward re-engagement. Not because you demanded it, but because they feel the loss of something meaningful. That kind of response can only come from space, from the emotional vacuum that silence creates, because without it, they may never recognize the value of your presence. The second possibility is harder, but just as important. They don't return. They stay withdrawn. They may even disappear entirely. But that too is truth. And sometimes the truth we need the most is the one that feels the harshest. They weren't willing to show up. They weren't invested in the same way. They weren't capable of giving what the relationship needed. But without silence, you might have stayed stuck in ambiguity, thinking if you just gave a little more, tried a little harder, said the right thing, you could have changed the outcome. The space created by silence acts like a mirror. It reflects back to both people where they truly stand. And what's beautiful about it is that it requires no force, no begging, no emotional chasing. It simply allows what's real to surface on its own. You're not pushing, you're watching. You're giving the connection the breathing room it needs to show its true form. It's also a gift to yourself. That silence gives you the chance to listen, not to them, but to yourself. You begin to hear your own intuition more clearly. You start noticing patterns. You see how much effort you were putting in to keep something alive that wasn't being fed on both sides. And you start to shift from needing answers from them to recognizing that their behavior is the answer. Silence isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about protecting your emotional clarity. And ironically, in a world that runs on noise, silence is often the loudest message you can send. It says, I respect myself too much to stay in a dynamic that feels unbalanced. It says, I don't need to beg for attention. I'm watching what your absence reveals. That space you create is the moment where reality reveals itself, not through conversation, not through explanations, but through action or inaction. And once you see the truth clearly, you can make choices from strength instead of fear. When you go silent after someone pulls away, what they do next tells you more than any words ever could. Their reaction is pure truth. It's not rehearsed, not filtered, not curated to please you. It's instinctive. It shows their true investment, their emotional maturity, their desire, and their capacity to handle connection. While we often get caught up in what someone says they feel or want, it's their behavior in your absence that reveals the actual level of care and commitment they hold for you. Many people are good with words. They'll say they miss you, that they care, that they're just going through something. But when you take a step back and allow silence to do the talking, you bypass the performance and get straight to the reality. If someone truly values the relationship, they'll notice your silence, and more importantly, they'll be moved by it. They'll feel the change in energy, the emotional gap your presence used to fill, and if they genuinely care, they'll be drawn to close that gap. You don't need to announce that you're going silent. You don't need to give a warning or an explanation. Silence isn't about making someone guess what's wrong. It's about no longer engaging in a situation where you are doing all the emotional work. If someone can go days without checking in, without wondering how you are, without making an effort to reconnect, their silence in response to yours is not accidental, it's intentional. That's not indifference hiding behind confusion. That's clarity dressed up as distance. Often, the people we are most afraid of losing are the ones who are already emotionally unavailable. So when they withdraw, we panic. We try to close the gap with effort, affection, overthinking, and reaching out. But when you finally step back and say nothing, when you leave space instead of filling it, they're forced to choose, not with words, but with actions. And that's when you find out who they really are in the context of the relationship. If they miss you, they'll reach out. If they want to fix things, they'll make the effort. If they regret pulling away, they'll come forward and own their behavior. But if they don't, if they stay silent too, that's your answer. They weren't as emotionally invested as you were, and that answer might hurt, but it saves you from wasting more time in a connection where you were already alone. The hard part is accepting that sometimes silence will bring the truth you didn't want to see. You might realize that you were holding onto potential, not reality. That you were more in love with who they could become than who they actually are. But it's in those moments, in the stillness, that you finally stop chasing an illusion. You get to grieve what's real, not the fantasy your hope created, and from there, you can begin to heal. Sometimes the most painful answers are the ones we've known deep down, but weren't ready to face. Silence helps you face them. It brings the truth to the surface. It forces the other person to reveal their true character through how they handle your absence. Do they rise to meet you? Do they feel your silence as a loss? Or do they vanish into it? You don't need closure from someone who can't communicate. You don't need one last conversation or one more explanation. What you need is to observe. Watch what they do when you stop making it easy for them to stay disconnected. Watch what happens when you no longer fill the space they emptied. Their reaction is the most honest thing they'll ever give you. Because ultimately, love isn't about how people act when everything is easy. It's about how they show up when things are uncomfortable. When distance forms, when silence falls, their instinctive response in those moments, not their rehearsed words later, is the truth you've been waiting for, not the fantasy you've been hoping for. When someone pulls away and you respond with silence, not from pride, but from peace, you give both of you the chance to see the truth. In that space, their reaction reveals everything: their intentions, their capacity for connection, and the role they truly see you playing in their life. You don't need to chase answers. You don't need to beg for clarity, because the way they respond to your silence is your clarity. And in that moment, you take your power back, not by controlling the outcome, but by letting it reveal itself. Tank Yo.